Hey guys, we've made our filling for our Glamorgan sausages. I just love saying that word, it's so fun. And now I'm ready to actually put the sausages in their shells. And they use the word sausage sort of as an in-house joke because there's actually no meat in here. So the first thing I've got going here is I've got my pastry mat out. If you don't have a pastry mat, a large square of wax paper or parchment paper works wonders. And my first instruction is to lightly flour my surface. So I have my handy dandy little flour shaker here, which came apart, and I'm not sure why it's not sticking. Perhaps I didn't screw it on it correctly, and there we go. All right, so I got this on here. It's got a little wire mesh thingy here, and rather than trying to sprinkle it all over the parchment, I actually just sprinkle it on my rolling pin. Give my rolling pin a good pat down there and sort of rub it all over there. And then I'm just going to take my hands and lightly distribute the flour. Now you'll notice my plastic mat keeps going up and down. That's because when I store it in my cabinet, I don't have a shelf big enough to lay it flat and just leave it be and not put a bazillion things on it. So I put it upright and it sort of squiggles down. And that's okay because when I start working with it, it's going to flatten out. Now, plastic tends to slide. So in order to keep my plastic from sliding, I have a very damp, we're talking downright wet, towel underneath there. And I just have it running underneath all of this. And as you'll notice, my mat doesn't slide. So if you're sliding all over your counter, a damp towel or even a damp paper towel will work wonders for you. The issue here though is that since I have flour and I'm trying to keep it dry, I got to make sure that my rolling pin doesn't end up in the damp flour. So you're going to see me putting it off to the side over here quite frequently because I can't afford to get it wet. Now, the base of the Glamorgan sausage is going to go in a puff pastry mist, and yes, you can make your own, but I'm going to cheat and I'm just going to buy some at the store in the freezer section. I pulled it out and I defrosted it in the refrigerator overnight per instructions. There are some other defrosting instructions, but I use the overnight one because that gives you the best results. And then I'm just going to take my puff pastry here and pull it out. The other one I'm going to leave covered with cling wrap because we don't want it to dry out. Dry puff pastry is not fun to work with. Now the first instruction that I've got is to unroll my puff pastry. So we're going to do that very gently, and you can see there's a lot of flour on it. They do that so it doesn't stick to itself. And there's parchment paper everywhere, so we're just going to gently unroll it. And it's perfect in terms of defrosting because it is not breaking. And then my next instruction is to make it slightly larger by rolling it out with a rolling pin. So just like we would with pie crust, we start from the middle and we work our way out. And you're going to start from the middle and work your way down. And again, we want those edges fairly even because it's going to make a difference in the pretty, not in the taste. And I got some edges here that are not sticking out quite as much as the others. So I'm just going to, again, start from the middle and work my way out. And that seems about as flat as I can get it. Got a little edge here that's not quite right. Okay. So I've got this here, and my pastry runs from about 14 inches on this side, well, from the edge, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares over. Not quite. I'd like to lift it and move it, but I'm really afraid if I do, it's going to tear. So I've got a corner here that I need to get out. I need that there, and then this one here needs to go up just a bit, share the width with the dough. And as you can see, I'm just working with the dough just a little bit to make sure it's sort of lined up on those edges a little bit more neatly. All right, now it says I'm supposed to cut it in half. I find the easiest thing to cut things with is a acrylic or nylon pizza wheel. Don't use a metal one because it will cut your bowl. So I'm going to count my squares here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 doesn't divide evenly in two, so I'm going to have to go a half one. 2 1/2, 2 1/2. And I'm just going to sort of have to eyeball it. 2 1/2. And I have discovered, don't look at your wheel. look at where your halfway mark is. Got your wheel there? Put your eyes on the halfway mark, and as you bring your wheel to it, you got it perfectly with a nice straight line. So I've got that done, and then I'm just going to use my bench knife. It's not sharp enough to be a knife, although if you ran your finger over it hard enough, you'd probably cut yourself. But it's got this nice, deep metal edge on it there, and that just makes it so much nicer to work with because you can slide it underneath an awful lot of stuff and lift things up. Now this is getting a little bit sticky here, but once I've lifted it off from the bottom, it's not going to stick again because there's nobody pushing it into the mat. Some meanie took this dough and just sort of pushed it into the mat like he wanted to abuse it or something. So I've got my filling here, and it says to divide it in half. So how do I know I'm going to divide it in half fairly equally? I'm actually going to flatten it out all the way across the bowl so that it is equally distributed from one side of the bowl to the other. And once I've got a nice, level, smooth surface, and I can tell it's level and smooth because I'm going around with a spoon, I'm not filling any ups or downs, and it's all level. Oops, got a little section here that's not level. So now that I've got it all smooth and level, as you can see, it takes up the same amount of space in the bowl, then I can just sort of divide the bowl in half and scoop the mix to one side for one half, and scoop the mix to the other side for the other half. Okay, now I've got fairly equally divided amounts of dough, and my instructions say to take this filling and to lay half of this filling on the one half of that puff pastry. So we're just going to put it there, and it looks like I'm going to have just enough to get all the way to the end. Let's see. And you can always use your fingers and shape it out and make it a little more even if you'd like. There you go. And there we go. There's our equal half. And of course, because I just can't leave stuff in the spoon, it's going to come off so that we're all equal there. Okay. Now I'm going to take my spatula here, and I'm just going to sort of tippity tap things and make sure that it goes all the way to the edge and to the sides, and that it is fairly equally distributed. Got a little center here that doesn't quite have as much food as everybody else, so sort of push that around a bit. And then I want to make sure that I've got a fairly flat edge, but I'm going to need to make sure that I have an inch of strip here and an inch of strip there, because I'm going to take this one piece of puff pastry and I'm going to put it on top of the other one, and I want it to stick. It's not going to stick to the filling, guys. It's going to stick to itself. So we got to make sure that there's enough room for the filling to stick to. And those leeks are trying to escape. Put them back there. No escaping. And again, we want to make sure that they're all nice and equally distributed so that when people get their portion, it all looks the same and nobody says, well, theirs is bigger than mine. They've got more filling than mine. And mostly, Mom, make him stop looking at me. Oh, they don't do that for the food, right? Okay, we've got that. Now, I have a beaten egg somewhere. I know I beat one. Where to put it? Okay, if I were an egg, where would I be hiding? I wish there was a pause button on this so you guys wouldn't see me frantically looking around for the egg that I know I beat. Now, I put just a tiny little bit of water in it so it'd be a little bit runnier, and then I'm just going to take what's called a basting brush or a pastry brush. You baste with it, but since we're making pastry, I guess it's a pastry brush today, and I'm just going to sort of paste that there, just a little layer of paint. I'm going to paint that, and I'm going to paint the other side as well. And I'm not going to paint the far edge, the skinny narrow edge of it, because I don't want it to stick there. I'm going to have the little Glamorgan sausage peeking out. So I've got that there, and I'm going to put a little bit on this edge here too. Now, when I pulled out the puff pastry, I'm sure you noticed that the inside of it had a lot of flour on it, and the outside did not. So I'm going to put the floury sides in, facing each other, and facing the sausage roll here, or the Glamorgan sausage roll, because there's no sausage in it. And I'm going to do that because it's going to look prettier. So now I'm going to take this puff pastry and see how much easy it's lifting up there. And I'm just going to flip it over on one edge here. And I didn't get it right on the first flip, and that's okay because it's a pastry dough. You can work with it. So now we're just going to take our little edges here. Oops, I want this dough out there. I want this dough there. And we just want to make sure that our dough edges line up. Now let me make sure I'm supposed to do that, because I think last time nope, I did it wrong. Darn it. Okay, I'm going to have to take this off. I'm wondering why, because last time I didn't have the edges. And I'm just going to take this and I'm going to put the pastry and fold it over its edges. So put all that effort into making it flat, and now I need it round. So I'm just going to fold these edges over here, and I'm going to make a little log. And it's going to be a little bit difficult, but you know what? Mistakes happen in cooking all the time. And a good cook is not one who never makes mistakes. A good cook is one who knows how to hide the mistakes. Okay, so we've got our handy-dandy little log here, and then I'm actually going to pinch the dough together so that it seams and stays. And I don't know if you can see me doing that. I'm sort of blending the two doughs together from either side. And then I'm just going to tap it down. And I want to make sure that there are no holes in it, simply because if there are holes in it, the filling is going to leak out when we bake. Oops, that one's not pinched very well. And it's got a little hole. Okay. So again, this side does not look particularly pretty, but we are going to make sure that it is all even from one end to the other. And what we're going to do is we're going to roll it over. We're going to use that bench knife to help us to sort of lift it and give it a good twist. Oh yeah, much prettier side there. And then we're going to cut these into 2-inch squares. Now remember that my pastry mat has these markers here, so every 2 inches, I just have to give it a good cut. And I got one that's got a little bit of a leftover. That's okay. So it's got a little bit of a leftover. And I will bake these and put them together. And that way, before I serve them to my guests, and it looks, I can check to see. I mean, I know it's going to look pretty, but this way I can make sure that it tastes good. So now I'm going to take a sharp knife. Actually, that doesn't have enough of a blade, I think. I'm going to take a much bigger knife here. But I want to make sure my knife is very sharp. So I'm going to take my knife sharpener. When you sharpen a knife properly, you can hear the difference, because the blade, that's one sound. That's sort of a dull thunk. That's not enough. It's got that sharper tone to it. You want a sharp knife for what you're doing, because what I'm going to do is, apparently I'm going to drop things, is I'm going to cut a hole in the top of the pastry. Now this does two things. First off, it's going to give it a place for the steam to vent so my pastry doesn't explode. And secondly, because I'm working with puff pastry, it's going to puff up, literally, and it's going to look pretty, and you're going to be able to see the insides, and it's just going to look very nice. So I've got that one ready to go. This one doesn't going to get any slits because it's already whole to begin with. And we're just going to set this one aside as a little taster for me, and we'll call it done with. And then we're going to get a little bit smarter with this one here. And remember that we're going to roll it up over itself. So we're going to put it not quite in the center, a little off center, so that when I roll it up, it rolls up a little more easily. And again, we're putting out little layers here so that I don't have to mess with so much later. Okay, that looks like a fairly even distribution to begin with. And making sure we don't waste any of our good ingredients. I mean, it took us a long time to crumb the bread and zest the lemons and wash and grate those leeks. So we're going to just sort of give us a nice little rounded mound here, coming all the way out to the edges. That's got a little corner in it that's not quite full. We want that full. We want that edge full. That's got a little corner that's not quite full. And it's the little touches when you're baking that just make sure that everything is even and uniform. If you can do that, then your cooking comes out a lot better, because you're not going to have sections that are burnt and sections that are raw because it was bigger or smaller in the oven. And that's what you're going to do there. And again, I need to make it sure that I've got just enough dough over here to hook it up there. And then we're going to roll the short end up a little bit. And you'll notice I'm rolling the sausage filling in there. And then I'm going to put this over and make sure that the dough covers. And what's the next step here? Oh, you guys remember that. We're going to pinch the dough together. Nice and tight, because we want them to actually think they're all good part of the family and all friends there. We can even pinch the end if we want, and pinch this end so it doesn't come out. And then we're just going to tack it down with our fingers and make sure that there are no holes. I got a hole in my dough there. Now this part doesn't have to be as pretty because it's going to be on the bottom. And I got to tell you that rolling it like this serves a couple of advantages. First off, it hides the ugly seam. And secondly, it helps distribute the dough just a little bit better. And we're doing okay. And my computer has decided that it wants to go to sleep. It's tired of making things. So we've got this all nice and done. And again, we're just gonna line it up just a tiny little bit. So it's gonna line up with my 2 inches there. And again, we're gonna just take, and I'm gonna use a bench knife. I'm not using this thing, because if I use this thing, it's gonna cut my plastic and I will cry. So cut it in 2-inch pieces. And since I sharpened that last time, I don't need to sharpen it this time. But this one didn't quite get the right shape that I want, so I'm going to play with my dough just a tiny little bit. And then I'm going to make that slit. So then I'm going to use the bench knife again, and I'm going to slide them off there, and I'm going to transfer them to my prepared baking pan that's got a sheet of parchment on it so that it won't stick to the bottoms of these. That's off screen. I'm going to take a break here now, and I'll show them to you when I pull them out of the oven. Okay, guys? Take care.